Before I dive in today, I want to let you know that I'm teaching one of my free classes live on Wednesday, March 27th at 12 p.m. Eastern. This class is called The 5 Common Mistakes That Can Undermine Your Newborn's Sleep. This class is ideal if you're expecting or your baby is 3 months or younger. I'll link to the sign-up page in the show notes. Transitioning back to work after maternity leave can be stressful. That's why I asked today's guest to come on and share some tips with you all and some advice on mindset. Rebecca Olson is a certified professional life coach who helps women transition into becoming working moms. I can't wait for you to hear Rebecca's thoughts on mom guilt and the stories we tell ourselves. In fact, it inspired me to reflect on my own maternity leave and transition back to work and the stories I was telling myself, and I'm going to share more about that in next week's episode. Hi, I'm Allison and Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of 2. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. Well, hey, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you because I think the transition back to work after the end of maternity leave can be really challenging and stressful for a lot of women. And I don't think it gets talked about enough. In fact, I think it's a topic that a lot of people are scared to talk about. So can't wait to dive in. But before we do that, the very first question I always like to ask my guests is, what inspired you to pursue your vocation and to start your business?
Thank you, Allison, for having me on the podcast. This is a really important topic. And it's such a great question, why I got into coaching in the first place. I coach ambitious working moms. And I think the truth of it is really that I was an ambitious working mom. I still am, obviously. But back when I was pregnant with my first, which is now almost 10 years ago, I was really struggling with being an ambitious person and being a mom. I didn't know how to balance these two things. I felt very lost, very confused. I didn't know what I wanted out of my career. I needed help. And so eventually that led me to find a coach, led me to get to know the coaching industry, eventually become a coach. And then when I started my business, I just wanted to help women that were in the same position I had been in that pivotal moment, what I think is such an important moment, such a pivotal transitional moment, I would say, for women that are becoming moms. And we need all of the support we can get at that time. And so that is ultimately what I do and why I do it.
I love it and totally agree. And I often talk about how becoming a parent was a very humbling experience for me. So I consider myself a high achiever. I'm a planner. I did a lot of preparation before becoming a mom. I read all the books, and I almost immediately learned a really big lesson, and that is that I can have all the plans in the world and things might not happen the way I thought they would, because each child is unique, each postpartum experience is unique, each work situation is unique. And so I know one of the areas that can be really stressful is that despite best laid plans about what it's going to look like to transition out of maternity leave and back into work, your feelings might change and you might start to struggle as you prepare for that transition. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the struggle that you're mentioning is, just to be clear, it's an internal struggle, right? I think there's a lot of internal questioning that happens when, particularly with our first, certainly it can continue to happen though as you have more kids, but when you are becoming a parent, you are sorting out this new life and this new role and this new experience and this tiny human that your heart is just like interwoven with, right? You have changed on some level fundamentally, and that part is very confusing. And I've had countless conversations with moms that say, what was important to me before I became a mom, just 6 weeks ago, like I just had my kid 6 weeks ago, and now 6 weeks later, here I am. Everything feels fundamentally different. Now, yes. I like to say that I don't think that you're a totally different person, for sure. I mean, I would imagine some people might say that and experience that, but for the most part, what changes is like that internal drive, and a lot of the reasons why we're doing things, and things that are like the things that are important to us become much more important to us, right? Things just get really heightened for us. And that is a internal conversation that, we're not having a lot as women, as moms. And I don't think we really know how to have, because it's so confusing in the middle of it. And then if you add things like postpartum, and you add sleep deprivation, and you add all these other things, it's not easy to navigate all of those things going on. And so what I find is there's a lot of women that try to get back into like the life and the who they were before they had kids. I'm just going to go back. I felt that way. I'm just going to go back to maternity leave. From maternity leave, we're going to get back to work. We're going to like get in a better routine. We're going to get back into things. It's like fundamentally that was never going to happen. It just wasn't possible to get into the same routines, to operate the same way, because I, as a person, am somewhat different now. Yes. And I have to make change. I have to make room for some of that change. And I think the second piece of it that seems to, I don't know, at least it happened with me in my first. We have this idea that life is gonna kind of return to some normalcy, and yet there's this tiny human that takes up an immense amount of time and energy. I didn't have 12 hours of extra time every day to devote to something before I had a kid. I certainly don't have it afterwards, but we have this idea that somehow they're just gonna fold into life. It doesn't quite work that way. Yes. They take energy, they take time, they take thought, which means that you're taking energy, time, and thought away from something else. And that transition of learning of how to navigate that, like I think that's the crux of what the leave and the return to leave is really important to be focusing on.
It's so true. It's like I remember thinking, how did I ever think I was busy before I had kids?
Right. 100%.
What? I know I was, but how did I ever feel that way?
Right.
It's a wild change.
It's wild.
I like what you said. I think it's true. You become a different person to an extent, and there's no planning that can prepare you for what that's going to feel like.
It's different for everyone.
Yesterday, I asked my followers on Instagram about their thoughts when they were transitioning back to work, and if they had something that they wanted me to incorporate in this conversation with you. And I got a lot of responses, which made me even more excited to chat with you. But a theme that I saw through these responses was related to mom guilt. And there's mom guilt in a variety of areas. But what they said is, as I was preparing to transition back to work, I felt an immense amount of guilt about leaving my child in the care of someone else. Mm-hmm. And then another mom took it even a step further and elaborated on the idea that when she was going back to work, it was specifically the concept of relinquishing control mm-hmm. of her child's care. And so I think this is a really common struggle where you have this guilt, I'm going to leave my child with someone else. And for those of us who are kind of type A, I'm going to have to relinquish control, and I won't be able to micromanage the care of my child. So tell me your thoughts on that.
I love this question. And we could talk about it in the two different pieces, because I think there are two different pieces to this, both the mom guilt and then the control piece of it. And you said something that I think is really important that we tweak it just slightly, which you said that people feel guilty because I'm leaving my child with someone else. It actually doesn't, that's not where the guilt comes from. The guilt comes from, I'm leaving my child with someone else and I shouldn't be. It's the last part that makes the guilt, right? Leaving your child with somebody else is one thing. Feeling like you're a bad mom, that you are doing something wrong, that you are not doing right by your child, that you are not prioritizing them because you should be the one that is watching them, 24/7. Yeah. That is where the guilt comes from. And that is a really important distinction, because it's the story that you're telling yourself about leaving your child with someone else and the implications of what that means about you as a mom and ultimately the care that you're giving your child, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you continue to believe that you are the only one that could provide the best care for your child, and there is no possible way that they are thriving or could thrive outside of your care 24/7. If that's the story you live in, it's going to be really hard to work within the guilt, right? Yeah. Or we can't do anything about it because that's it. That's the story. And so it does have, you have to get to this point as you start to interact with guilt and what that feels like, where you start to loosen with the idea that your child could get wonderful care and be taken and thrive and be taken care of in maybe even ways that you couldn't or can't in somebody else's care, right? It's not for me. I remember this was like quintessential me when I went back to work and all of this mom guilt. And I sent my daughter to this amazing daycare with this amazing provider that I could give a whole speech about how amazing this care was that she received. And yet I experienced so much guilt, feeling like I wasn't spending enough time with her. And then thus I wasn't prioritizing her. And then I was a bad mom because of it. And all of the stories that I was telling myself because of it. And I remember this day, she was probably at this point closer to like 11 months at this point. And I remember this day where she like made an animal sound. She made like she mooed or something like that. And I remember looking at my husband and going, "Did you teach her animal sounds?" And he was like, "I didn't even know she could do animal sounds," you know? And I was like, "Me neither." And it just dawned on me, like, oh my gosh, she's getting something I didn't even know I was supposed to provide her. She is getting so much better care, spending time with somebody that is trained to do this, that does this day in, day out with countless other children and has spent time with children in this way. I would give her different kind of care and it would be amazing and lovely. And she's also getting wonderful, thriving care, learning things that I could never teach her, right? And it was a moment that everything changed because all of a sudden I no longer had a story that I was supposed to be the one with her and that I was supposed to give her the best care. And if it was me, it was no one, right? I no longer had that story. I had a completely different story and it changed all of this guilt that I felt, right? And then it consequently changed a whole bunch of things after that because I was able to let the guilt go.
Yeah. And so do you have any tips if someone's listening and thinking, oh my gosh, yes, this is me right now. I am telling myself this story. How does one begin to change that story? So they're sitting at home, they're preparing to go back to work in 2 weeks. I just had a conversation with a mom yesterday. She's going back to work in 2 weeks. She's feeling very overwhelmed. She started half days of daycare this week to roll into it, going full days next week. And so how do you help someone who's having that narrative start to change that story?
One of the distinctions I like to make is there's a difference between feeling guilt and feeling sad or disappointed, right? Leaving your child to go be with someone else when you've just bonded with them and you've spent however many weeks you've spent with them and how you wish you could spend longer with them. Like that's a very sad moment, right? That's a sad experience. I would expect there to be disappointment, sadness, even some frustration at the situation. Like I would expect these big kind of icky negative emotions, as we like to call them, right? Guilt doesn't have to be one of them. Guilt is something different, right? Guilt is that story that somehow you are less than, you are not good enough as a mom because you're doing this thing, right? So we could start to parse out the different stories. And when you start to look at, like, I can let the story go of guilt that tells me that I'm a bad mom if I do this, and I could be left still with sadness and disappointment and like learn how to process that. That is a beautiful experience, right? Because sadness and disappointment and frustration, all these emotions are normal human experiences. And for sure, you're going to have a lot of them with your kids over the years that are sparked because of motherhood, right? And so learning how to separate those two things is important. So even just spending the time thinking about what are these stories that I'm telling myself, and am I sad about this, or do I really feel like I'm not a good mom because of this? And if you are feeling like you're not a good mom because of that, you get to start to question that, right? These are just stories. These are just thoughts. These are perspectives, I like to say they're literally just words that are going through your head. They have no meaning. There's no truth behind them. They're not factual. They're just words. They're just a perspective. You get to decide what perspective you have of this situation. So if right now your perspective is, I'm not a good enough mom because of this, now you get to say, okay, well, do I believe that? Is that really true? Does sending my kid off to daycare with somebody that will love them and hold them and give great care to them, does that mean I'm not a good enough mom? Am I really less than because of that? You get to start asking yourself really important questions around what you believe about this, right? And for me, that often happens in a journal. I do a lot better when I'm like writing. Some people, that's just that's talking out loud. Some people, that's going to a coach or someone like that that's going to help them through this process to be able to talk it out loud, right? But there has to be an intentional space that you're allowing yourself to start questioning what probably sounds very factual in your head, but when you actually put it out there and you start talking about it, at least with yourself, you realize like, that's actually not true. I could have a whole nother perspective about why sending my kid off to daycare to be loved and taken care of while I'm at work is actually the most amazing thing I could do as a mom, and how that makes me a wonderful mom because of it. You could have that perspective too and start to kind of shape that perspective if you give some intentionality behind it.
Yeah, you're making me think of a story of when I was working at the university and I was managing a team of gift officers, and I had one on maternity leave. And she was definitely, planning to come back. And I will never forget, I was in New York City sitting in a cafe, and she called and she said, I have to talk to you. And I remember saying, as your manager, as your friend, which area am I playing right now? And I think she kind of said, I need you to be my friend right now. And she said, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I could go back to work, and I don't think I can travel because all of these gift officers are out traveling.
Yeah.
And I said, tell me why. I'm very anxious about the thought. So we kind of talked through it. And I remember saying to her, this is normal. And I've been leaving my kids for years at this point. I said, and every trip I go on, I am sad and I feel some anxiety about leaving my kids. And then I land in New York City and I'm thinking, well, here I am and I'm really good at this job. And I hit the ground running and I'm thrilled to come home. But I learned to accept over the years that every single time I was going to leave on a trip, I was going to have these feelings of, oh, I'm sad to leave them. I wish I wasn't leaving them. And then every time I would land in my location, I would be a boss for 3 days doing the job. I loved it. It filled my cup. I came home excited. And so I think your distinction is a really important one, that it's not about, I can't have these feelings, but it's a little of that story you're telling yourself. And so what I had encouraged her was, let's give it a go. And if you go on that first trip and you land there and the whole time you're unhappy, we can reevaluate what you're doing. But I just remember she texted, I'm here, you're right. I cried when I left, but I'm here and it's working. And so I think it's sometimes letting yourself have those feelings about dropping your child off at daycare the first time and sobbing in the car, and that's okay.
Yeah. We like to make sadness and disappointment or even anxiety, like we like to think that those emotions mean something is wrong, something is bad, you shouldn't be doing something. It's whatever decisions you're making, they're wrong, right? They're not the right ones. And so in this case, when it comes to like traveling, you're feeling all this sadness before leaving, you're feeling all of this anxiety and disappointment and kind of wishing you were there. And so the story you're telling yourself is, well, I'm feeling this way, so it must mean that I shouldn't be traveling. It must mean that I'm in the wrong job, right? We like to label these things. That's a really natural thing for our brain to do, right? It wants to create closed loops. It wants to understand, right? It's just doing you a solid in trying to like close the loop for you. But it's our job to question it on some level and to say, hold on, I could be sad about leaving my kid and at the same time feel really good about the work that I'm about to do and know that it's the right place for me and that I'm good at what I do. And both of those things can be true simultaneously. I don't have to make these emotions mean anything except that I'm human and I love my kid, and the fact that I feel sad actually is probably a really good sign that you're super connected and that you're doing a great job.
Right. It's kind of the both and that I'm always teaching my kids. You can be both nervous to compete in this swim meet and excited at the same time.
Yeah, both are okay.
Yes, we can have multiple conflicting
Yeah. And we don't have to
feelings.
solve for the negative feelings either. Like, we don't have to solve
Right.
for the sadness or for the anxiety or the nervousness. Like, you could just be nervous and still do the swim meet, or you could be
Yes.
nervous and a little anxious and still drop your kid off, right? We don't have, we could always live within that. We don't have to solve for the icky feeling emotions. We like to label them as bad and wrong and like we shouldn't have them, versus just like, oh no, if I'm going to live a full life, I'm going to live a full life that includes the entire spectrum of emotions, everything from failure to joy. And that's living a big life, it's that big emotional experience.
And for me, I remember sometimes my husband the night before a trip might say, "What's wrong?" And I'd say, "I'm just doing my process. I'm feeling anxious and like maybe I shouldn't be going. And I know that as soon as I get on that plane, I will be good to go." And so I just stopped trying to fight it completely. I would just acknowledge it, acknowledge it was there. Here's what it is, and keep going.
Yeah. I love that.
So let's talk a little bit about that feeling if you're someone who micromanages and is thinking, I want every feeding to happen at this time, every nap to happen at this time, and all of that control that you may have been doing at home. And I think I love all the apps out there, but I think people are now using these apps on maternity leave, and then suddenly it's like, wait, I'm not documenting every wet diaper, all the things. And so there's that feeling of losing control. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, and there's going to be a transition there, right? Obviously, you're going to move from documenting diapers to documenting conversations and communication back into your job again on some level. And we're going to expect your brain to kind of go, whoa, what am I doing here? What's going to be, what am I supposed to be doing here? Is this right? Is this wrong? Right? Our brain likes to keep going down the path that it's on, right? Something in motion likes to stay in motion. And so whenever we change, whether that's just from into having a kid or into maternity leave, into going back to work, whatever it is, that change is going to come with a whole lot of like, our brain going, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing here, and feeling lots of those feelings that come up in the middle of that. Control is a really interesting emotion. Ultimately, it is an emotion, and it comes from usually this place of really feeling like you need to get things right. I'm not even going to say perfect, because I don't think about it as being perfect. I'm a perfectionist myself, but I think it comes from a place of not wanting to get it wrong. And in this case, now somebody else is taking care of your kid and you don't want them to get it wrong. And it's what we tend to label the wrongness as meaning. Again, we come back to storytelling on some level. What does it mean to get it wrong? It usually, or to fail, right? Or to not get it perfect, if you use that word. It means that we are less than as a person, or in this case, we're less than as a mom. And once again, we're not giving our child the care that they need, and we're not meeting their needs in the way that we're supposed to, or we think that we're supposed to. And so somehow this all has negative meanings about us as a mom and the kind of caretaker that we are for our children, right? There's a whole story that comes behind this and why we even seek that control. Now, obviously, it's not wrong to document. It's not wrong to want things to be a certain way, to raise your children in a certain way. If you want to go back to likely an ambitious career that has you focused, very, very focused on that job, at least for 8 hours during the work week, right? At some point, if you want to go back to that, then you're going to have to let go of some of how your children are being taken care of if they're being taken care of someone else. You likely can't have both. That means you have to make sure that trade-off really feels worth it to you on some level. This is a conversation I have a lot with women that are thinking about becoming stay-at-home moms, right? They were working before. Now this whole transition happened, and they're not sure if they want to go back to being a working mom. Maybe they want to be a stay-at-home mom. And sometimes it's because of this. It's like, I want to raise my child in a very specific way. I don't want anybody else to do it. I love that. Like, I'm all about it. You get to do that, and you get to make that choice. then you're letting go of something on the other side, which is likely what you were focused on in terms of your career. So there's always going to be a trade-off here, and the trade-off is never going to feel great. Again, we kind of come back to this, like, these decisions that feel big and hard to us, they don't often come with that really peaceful, wonderful, calm gut feeling like we all crave when we're making decisions. They just don't, because going after a big life, making big life decisions, focusing on you, all of these things are decisions that kind of go against the grain on some level. And so they come with discomfort. Discomfort isn't bad. It's not good. Doesn't mean anything. We don't need to label it. It just is what it is. Right. And so really learning how to, or really circling all the way back to this like decision of, if I choose to work, then I trading off this level of control over here. Am I okay with that? Is that the decision that I want to make? Like, your brain needs to be crystal clear on that, so that whenever it comes back to questioning it and wants to like pick back up control again and like micromanage the nanny or the daycare center or whatever and want to do it a different way, your brain needs it needs to come back to, no, you've decided to do it this way. You've decided to go back to work. You've decided to relinquish this control over here for this. You love your reasons for it. That's always a really important part. Like, you've decided and you love your reasons for going back to work and relinquishing this control, and your brain has something to go back to, which is also a really important part of the process. Even if you're somebody that knows 100% I'm going back to work, like I was one of those people. There was no way I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. I knew I wanted to work.
Yeah.
That was totally me. But I still had to have a moment where I was crystal clear on why I wanted to do that, so that when my brain did want to tell me I was doing lots of things wrong and that I should be more in control and things like that, I could go back to all of my reasons why I was deciding this and think big picture and remember like the overarching goal here and of life just generally. And that helped my brain really calm down in the midst of these moments.
Yes. And it kind of falls into, I recently did a podcast episode on my parenting mantra, which is, I will make the best decision with the knowledge that I have right now, and I reserve the right to change my mind. And so when I think about this whole childcare and the angst about, did I choose the best childcare, and are they taking control in a way that I'm comfortable with? I always say, if you get into it, I realize switching childcare is not super easy, but if you get into it and you realize it might just be that I made the choice that's not ideal right now, and I might need to look into changing childcare. And so sometimes we can reserve the right to change our mind on who we're giving control to, but it doesn't mean that we aren't capable of letting someone else love on our children while we work.
Right, because remember, this is all an internal conversation. Your child, we're going to assume that your child is actually being taken care of, is being loved, is being fed, is getting playtime, is getting nourished, right? Is doing great as it is. Like, we're going to assume that, right? And so really this need of control, or this fear of lack of control, or even the looking at the way they're doing it and going, oh, I wouldn't do it that way. I wish that they were doing this that way. All it's doing is creating a whole bunch of internal chaos for you, for no one else, right? If there was obviously a situation where your child needed to be exited from that because it wasn't a good place, that's a totally different conversation. But usually when it comes down to that need for control, being the type A kind of person and needing things to be X, Y, or Z, all you're trying to do is not actually control your external life. You're trying to control your internal life. You're trying to control your story. You're trying to control the way you feel. You're trying to control these. That's not a bad way to do it, but that's ultimately what's happening. Is it's just controlling your internal chaos, not actually the chaos that's happening outside.
Right. Another area that I think some women struggle, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, and if you hear this from a lot of women, is communicating how they're feeling to their manager. And I'm not talking about throwing up all their emotions on them, but just communicating their basic needs. So I was fortunate to have a wonderful manager when I transitioned back to work. She actually didn't have children, but she just got me, and she knew I was a straight shooter and that there was no need to panic, because I also was definitely going back to work. But I was able to communicate, here's how I want my transition back, or things aren't going well. My daughter's sick. I'm going home. I just had a really good dialogue, and she trusted at the end of the day I was going to get the job done. But I know a lot of people don't have that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you say to the woman who's feeling she can't communicate with her manager? Do you feel that it's a little bit her story that she can't do it? Or are you finding that truly people are not getting this transition?
I mean, it's for sure, it's both. And I think we're in a big cultural shift right now since COVID, where the conversation around parents generally is heightened in the workforce, and recognizing the value of parents in their workforce and needing to provide them the support that they need and the time with their family and the importance of that, right? So these conversations are happening at a much higher level than they've probably ever had before. And it's going to take a long time for that all to trickle down to all us down here on some level. And so I like, of course, there are things that can happen on a systematic level. Your boss, I'm sure, could get way better at supporting you. Maybe has never supported anyone before. It doesn't really matter. Like, the company could get better. Your boss could get better. Your team could get better. All these things could get better. And you control none of that. So you could decide to focus on that and make that the problem, or you could decide to put your energy in, well, what can I do? What will it take for me to advocate for myself in the way that I need, even if they never change, right? Mm-hmm. And that, I think that's just the most useful place to put your energy, because it's the only thing that you can actually control in this situation. Otherwise, you're just spinning in complaining and frustration, right? Really, what needs to start happening is what's getting in the way of you advocating for yourself. If you believed that at the other end was the change that you desire, or the request was going to be granted, what's it going to take for you to get there, right? And for us as women, there is oftentimes there's a people-pleasing aspect of it. We don't want them to be disappointed. We don't want them to see us as not being committed to our job. We don't want them to think that we don't want to be here. We don't want to be seen as like a weak link we don't want to, like, weaker than the rest of the team. I've had a lot of people that I've worked with that are like the only parent on their team, and it's like, I'm the only one, it's all these things, it's all these stories, right? It's all these things that we think. And so it's this fear that starts to get in the way of us advocating for ourselves in some way. And I always come back to, like, well, it's going to be, if you do nothing and you say nothing, it's going to be really hard for you, right? You're not going to have the life you want as a working mom. You're not going to have the time with your kid that you want. You're not going to get the things that you want. That's going to be really hard. Also, it's going to be really hard for you to speak up and say what you want, right? Both are going to be hard. Which hard do you want to tackle? Yeah. Which one is going to get you to the desired result that you want, right? And if ultimately you advocate and you don't get what you want, now you get to decide what you want to do, right? I would rather you learn that you're in a job or in a position that's not going to allow you the life that you want to have as a working mom, so you can then decide if you want to stay or not, because guess what? You're always an at-will employee, so you get to decide to leave. And if you believed that there was another job out there that they would hire you and you would get what you want, would you just go find that? And for a lot of people, they're like, well, yeah, I would. Right. It's like, all right. So do you believe that that's true? And now we start to have a whole nother conversation around, is what you want out there? And do you believe that? And if you don't, why don't you believe that? Because there are literally billions of jobs out there. And I am sure that you qualify for a good portion of the kinds of ones that you want. So now we need to start talking about you believing in yourself and believing that what you want is possible, believing that what you want to go after is possible for you. All these like confidence questions start coming up and so forth, right? That have to get to the bottom of it. But really at the very like heart of this conversation around advocating for yourself is remembering that you are an at-will employee that gets to decide if you want to be there or not. And when you remember that, when the job isn't the end-all be-all, and you believe that there are other jobs out there, now let's really talk about what you want, because ultimately you get one life. And so, I mean, at least I believe that you get one life. And so here it is. And it's time, you get to be the one that controls how you spend that time and where you put your energy so you can have the life that you want.
Yeah. And if you spend time thinking they won't accommodate what I want, or they'll be upset if I advocate for myself, and then you don't do it, and then you spend all this time going to look for a new job, and maybe you find a great job, but potentially you leave a job where they would have accommodated you.
100%.
So I always tell people, you won't know until you ask, and then you'll find their true colors, and then you can make a decision on whether you want to spend the time looking for a new job. But I have heard multiple times where someone leaves and they say, well, at the exit, they said, well, we could have done that for you.
Right. Yeah. Happens all the time.
Miss out.
Yeah, of course. Just out of fear, right? Fear of how they're ultimately going to be perceived. And whenever we're fearing how we are going to be perceived, it's because we actually are already thinking that about ourselves. So it always comes back to our own beliefs in ourselves at like the core of it, right? Which is so much of the coaching that you and I probably do is right on back there to like, you believe in yourself. And when you feel like super grounded in you, confident in you, you know, who you are, what you want, your ability to speak up becomes infinitely easier. And then thus like the life that you want becomes, you know, much more attainable to you because of that.
Well, I have loved this conversation. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me today. Can you tell everyone how they can find you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here, Allison. I feel like we could talk about this for hours, really. I could talk about it for hours. This is such an important conversation. Maybe there's going to be a follow-up sometime to this.
Yeah.
But yes, you can find me. Really, the best way to find me is on my own podcast, which is called Ambitious and Balanced Working Moms. You can find that on any channel that you listen to podcasts, as well as YouTube. I've just recently launched my podcast on YouTube, and so you can find me there at Rebecca Olson Coaching as well.
Well, this has been great. I'm going to link to that in the show notes. And thanks again. And I would love to have a follow-up conversation. I agree. We could talk for hours and we could take this in about 10 different directions.
100%.
But thank you so much for the work that you do supporting working moms. I think it's incredibly important. And I look forward to connecting again soon.
All right. Thank you, Allison. Appreciate it.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, pleep and wellnesscoach.com.